positive sense of how.
We are live now.
We are live.
Yes. Go ahead.
Hi.
Hello. Everyone who is watching us. Mostly, I'm assuming all of them are home, and none of them are sitting in cafes and chilling or sitting by the beach or something. Welcome to this amazing live TV, I would say, where I have Matt, I have Terry. We are going to be speaking about a basic. We're just discussing about liberty and culture, and going to touch upon multiple facets of human beings. We'll discuss about isms. If you haven't seen the 8 deadly isms and every other video that See the People channel on YouTube as well as the website has, you must do it right now. We'll give you like 10 seconds to go on the YouTube channel and quickly take a look. With that, I think the Zoom is yours. So for you to, I will maybe keep interjecting. For people to just give a overview, if we could start with that to both of you, and then we'll step into the step 2 and 3 ones. What do you think about that? Yeah.
Sure.
What do you?
So I just want to thank you all for having us on this Zoom. I would so much rather be doing this in India. We travel a lot, but India is one of the places that we always wish we could get back to more. It's one of, I don't know, it just holds a special place in our heart for a lot of different reasons. So thank you very much. And hopefully we will do this in person sometime soon.
It's the food.
It's the food, it's the people, it's the culture. It might be the jewelry for me. I don't know,
maybe.
just saying. Although I will say that so far in the last 2 weeks, we've given talks in Germany. I did a talk in London, and now we're here. And so it is kind of nice to not have jet lag. So I do kind of appreciate that. It's been an interesting 3 months. It's actually almost 3 months to the day when Matt and I ended a vacation early and came back to Washington because the coronavirus was getting so bad, or people thought it was getting so bad and everything was locked down. We were on vacation in a beautiful little island in the British Virgin Islands. And it was really terrible having to leave such a beautiful place to come back here. But we were actually worried that flights were going to be canceled and restaurants were closing where we were. So we just decided to come home and start dealing with everything that was going on here. So we got home, and the first thing we did, of course, was go shopping because we'd been traveling for a while. We bought groceries. We might have stocked up on bourbon because if you're trapped at home for a long, long time and you run out of a cocktail, it can get kind of nasty. But we also went out and bought plywood for our windows. We live in Washington, D.C., 2 blocks from the U.S. Capitol. We've lived here for a long time. And when we were reading about these impending lockdowns and quarantines, we know that people are not meant to stay home. We're social creatures. And we were worried that something was going to happen. I mean, there were initial protests against the lockdowns, but those were in different places. And we knew that something was going to happen. We were hoping that it wasn't. We were hoping that we would never have to board up our front windows with the plywood that we purchased. But we were also just worried, as I keep saying, that something bad was going to happen. And we just didn't know what that spark was going to be. What would it be that would get people out of their homes and just riled up and demonstrating and protesting about something? And unfortunately, it was the George Floyd murders that happened in Minneapolis. We were watching that. At first, the demonstrations here started out peaceful. And, you know, in the United States, our First Amendment and the freedom of speech is so critical to us. And we were supportive of people going out and protesting for this atrocity that happened. And there are serious problems within our police force and our government. And there's too much power concentrated everywhere. So then we started watching the protests, and there were some bad apples in the crowd, and they went out and they started rioting and looting. There's a small pharmacy 2 blocks from our house that was looted. They went in and took all of the prescriptions that were set up to be delivered to their patients the next day. It was getting a little bit intense here for a few days. So luckily things have quieted down as far as the actual riots and protests and demonstrations. People are still protesting here. They're protesting all over the world. It's amazing what's been happening. And so now we're trying to look at all of these things. And we've been locked up for 3 months. We started to go out. We stayed in a hotel 2 nights ago. We took a road trip to Virginia. It was this crazy new world. We had freedom again. So we are now trying to focus on the positive solutions that we're seeing, and there are some positive things, and we kind of want to focus on that, how people locally and within their community are kind of trying to take charge of things and figuring stuff out for themselves rather than relying on the government.
So like this debate that we're having in our country, I think in some ways is unique to us. In other ways, it's universal to what's going on in India, what's going on in almost every country in the globe. And it's really a fundamental question. You mentioned the deadly isms. And I think we are having today a global debate about whether or not it's better to organize society from the bottom up with local knowledge and local solutions and tolerance for all of the incredible diversity that we have, not just in our communities, our countries, but in our world. And we're seeing this with the lockdowns, frankly, we're seeing that in the criminal justice system in the United States that led to the murder of George Floyd by a cop with very little accountability, is this shift towards some version of nationalism or paternalism or even socialism or progressivism in the sense that it originally meant in the United States that we could elect certain people and put them in charge of the government and give them almost unlimited power. You couldn't fire them, but as long as they had the right training, as long as they had our best interests at heart, that they would be able to reorganize society from the top down. And the entire premise of the lockdown was supposedly based on science that we now know wasn't science at all. It was a flawed model that speculated what might happen. It turned out to be colossally wrong. But whenever we take away that bottom-up local problem solving and replace it with a top-down, one-size-fits-all plan, and you can call it whatever you want. You can call it nationalism, you can call it paternalism, you can call it safety. We talk a lot about safety in our country. But the problem is nobody knows enough to organize society from the top down. And in our country, and I saw this happening in India, I saw it happening everywhere, the focus on the dangerous effects of a pandemic was left to us ignoring everything else. How are we going to get fed? How are we going to make sure that our hospitals stay open? How are we going to maintain the mutual support structure that ensures that people, particularly people at the margins of society, can survive a pandemic? Because the entire purpose of a market is to solve an infinite number of problems simultaneously, and no single mind, as Frederick Hayek would argue, could ever do that.
So you mentioned hospitals, and it's really amazing to watch what's happened to that. So there was this sweeping edict that every elective surgery and every elective procedure was canceled because we needed every single bed for the pandemic and for the COVID patients. And I know that things are getting difficult in India, and that hospital beds are unfortunately filling up there. But that wasn't the case here in the United States, but they still canceled what they considered elective surgeries or elective procedures, which included things like cancer treatments and surgeries for cancer and other actual life-threatening things. So the powers to be canceled them all. And so what happens now as an unintended consequence of that is that hospitals rely on those surgeries and those procedures for income. And they are losing money, and hospitals have actually had to lay off nurses and doctors and other workers because they don't have this income coming in. So you have these bureaucrats just making these edicts without understanding the bigger picture. And it should have been up to the local hospitals to figure out what their capacities are and make those decisions at a much more local level.
So we've been making a lot of videos about the unintended consequences of lockdowns in the face of COVID. And since the murder of George Floyd and the looting and the rioting and the peaceful protests, and we have all these things going on simultaneously, we've been talking a lot about the problems, but that's not really what we do at Free the People. Our job is to tell beautiful stories about what happens when people are free and how we solve problems and how we make a better world for everyone. So when we saw all of this bad stuff happening and we were looking at a project that we've been working on for a long time about restorative justice, we saw an opportunity to do something.
So restorative justice is a really interesting way to look at dealing with offenders and victims. I mean, the standard philosophy is that an offender has to pay a debt to society. Well, that offender doesn't necessarily have a debt to society. That offender has a debt to the person that he's actually harmed. So what restorative justice does is it's a private solution, and it gets the offender and mediators and victims and police officers all together in a room to talk about what happened and come up with a solution that works for those people. Putting people in jail isn't always the best solution. It tends to lead to recidivism and more crime and can ruin the lives of everyone involved. So we did a video based on a community in Longmont, Colorado that has been practicing this restorative justice for 10 years, longer than 10 years. It's a full-length documentary that we were holding to show at film festivals and all of that this summer. But of course, those were all canceled. And in light of the George Floyd murder, we decided that it was the time to release this video and show a different path forward in the criminal justice system. So we have a short trailer here that we're going to show you that we hope you will enjoy, and I hope that I can figure out how to share the screen appropriately. So, and that I show the right video.
Violence is to get rid of and to annihilate the opponent. But in the non-violent movement, the end is to convert the opponent and to bring about a society where all men will live together as brothers and every man will respect the dignity and worth of human personality. The two greatest human technologies, I will always say, are apology and forgiveness. And I saw that there might be room for people saying, I'm sorry, and people saying, I forgive you for what you did. I think those are powerful, powerful forces that are in our midst that go a long way in terms of repairing a relationship, in terms of people choosing accountability, and in terms of victims having a voice in terms of what's happening to them.
There's something about love that builds up. It's creative. There is something about hate that tears down and is destructive. If you love your enemies, you will discover that at the very root of love is the power of redemption.
So obviously that is the voice of Dr. Martin Luther King. And we very much believe that nonviolence is not just the morally right thing to do, but tactically, violence actually could lead to more militarization of police, to more criminalization, to more incarceration. I made that rhyme. That's not normally something I do. But all of these things, it sort of feeds on each other. And the alternative and the idea of restorative justice is quite radical in the sense that what if we got the adjudication of disputes out of government entirely? What if we gave it back to the community? What if we, instead of imposing top-down, one-size-fits-all rules on top of everybody, what if we did the bottom-up approach? So the principles of the free market, the principles of individual responsibility, the idea that people can solve problems through cooperation very much is applied to, in our case, the criminal justice system and mass incarceration and police violence and all of these problems we have in our country. There's always a solution that's positive. It's based on community and love and all that cool stuff. So we saw an opportunity, even though all of our plans were disrupted and we had no idea what was coming, we saw an opportunity to change the conversation. So we're in the midst of that challenge right now. There's a couple principles in that very much related to how Free the People does stuff, and how I think that those of us who are liberals, classical liberals, libertarians, constitutional conservatives, we have all these different words that we use to describe our philosophy. But one of the things we're really bad at is telling a story based on what your audience actually hears. And so a big thing that we care about is the words that we use. And I'll talk about just a couple phrases that are trending in the United States. Maybe they're trending globally because everyone's watching what's happening here. But one in particular I want to talk about, systemic racism. And I've had a number of guests on my shows, and we've sort of parsed this statement. And a lot of conservatives in our country love to just dismiss the phrase out of hand. There is no systemic racism. Things have gotten so much better. You guys know the arguments. But what we think is happening in the context of police violence is there's a lot of government imposed protections on the use of monopoly of force when it comes to police. And so when I talk about systemic racism, I go on to say racism is bad, but the system is the power of government that imposes it and protects bad actors within the system. So if we want to get rid of systemic racism, we got to focus on the system. In this case, government employee unions for police that always protect bad actors. So the problem happens again and again and again because good cops can't fire bad cops. It's part of the union. There's something called qualified immunity that doesn't allow citizens to sue the government, particularly police, but all sorts of stuff. The government is above the rest of us. There are fathers and mothers, and they get to discipline us as we please. All of that stuff, the system that allows for racism comes from government. This is an opportunity for us to talk about how government power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
There's a phrase, never let a crisis go to waste. And we've seen this in the government, the bills that were passed in the beginning of the pandemic. They definitely were, while yes, they were focused on providing relief to people that needed it, the government definitely used it as an opportunity to try to change the country and implement some of the more socialist type policies that we as freedom lovers and liberty lovers just find appalling. And so that's one of the things that we've been fighting about. But it really, we've changed our whole business model when all of this happened, because never let a crisis go to waste. So we started changing the stories that we were telling, the videos that we were making. And it's really why we tell stories here. We got such a great plug for our videos at the beginning of this episode, and I really appreciate that. But it's really how you connect with people. We've gone out and we've done interviews with people on how they're coping with this, from small business owners and restaurants. People's entire lives have been completely upended. And the only way we feel that you can reach people is through storytelling. It's just so critical to focus on that and be conscious of the words that you use, understanding that you may have a definition of one word, but when you're talking to someone, they may interpret it completely differently. So it's just really, really important, critical, in fact.
And that gets back to my beef with us libertarians, and I'm sure everybody has been to one of these conferences where someone is making a completely cogent, exactly right economic argument, and but
using Excel spreadsheets to make their point.
Yes, I thought you were going to make fun of me.
Or quoting dead economists, which he is wont to do, and I try to stop him every time I can.
Yeah, and I'm certainly guilty of this, and my criticism is really a criticism of myself as someone that grew up quoting Hayek and Mises and all the classical liberal philosophers. These people mean a lot to me, but sometimes that economic way of thinking doesn't translate for people who don't process information through economics. They process information through emotions.
Our favorite Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she famously said, "It's better to be morally right than to be factually correct," which on its surface is kind of a scary thought. But we agree with her up to a point. As Matt was saying, when we are trying to make our arguments, we focus on the facts and the figures, and we forget about the morality of what we are preaching. So we like to say that we are both morally right and factually correct. We need to tell the stories that highlight the individual people, and show the morality of what we're doing, and show how it flourishes. And I'm an engineer and I like numbers, but I don't think I've ever been convinced to change my mind about anything from a PowerPoint chart or an Excel spreadsheet, or even a quote by a dead economist.
Unless it's Hayek. Hayek is grandfathered in, but the
if I may ask, it's actually really interesting, because what you said is what I believe, and I have had, I won't say fights or debates, but discussion rather, with CCS, with Tom, with a lot of people from Atlas, and I myself, now being an author, I see the importance in storytelling, and what you mentioned, that facts and figures and data is important, but where we classical liberals, where we lack, is the storytelling. And I personally believe, and when I take sessions, or you should take sessions on the ideas of the philosophy of liberty, ideas about liberalism, I often say the idea of liberty is too direct. It unlike socialism, which targets your emotions, unlike communism, which targets your emotions, liberalism for me, or capitalistic ideas, are a lot more factually right, and which people don't, and like rational, right? Because you can question rationals later as well, but it hits directly, so people don't really able to understand or decode it. It does not really hit their emotions. So, and based on that, what you also mentioned about, right, about the bottoms up and top down approach, we will understand, like say 3 or 4 of us will be able to understand the benefit of bottoms up, because the concept of government is fairly new. It's not like we were born with government, right? We basically started what you ended up with your talk, your last bit was Lord Acton's, again, the power corrupts. I think also, which I mentioned in the beginning, that, we people like to control. I think that's a human tendency of controlling. We understand the idea of bottoms up, but to a lot more people who don't necessarily follow or fall in that band of liberty, right? I like to call that band of liberty as a Friedman band. So where Milton Friedman is classical liberal, and then David Friedman is ANCAP. So like a Friedman band, you can lie anywhere between a classical liberal from Milton Friedman to David Friedman. You still be called a libertarian, right? Libertarian or liberal, in which, depending on the country you are from. So bottoms up is, I am all up for it. But how would you sort of narrate that to a common layman who is culturally now embedded in it, saying no, because it starts from a patriarchal family. It starts from the family saying, I give you this order and you must do it. So we grow up around those kind of ideas and ideology. How would you break that if you have to?
It's a great question, and it's one that I wrestled with when I was originally trying to explain why lockdowns were wildly dangerous, particularly for people at the margins. And everybody was focused on security, and everybody was focused on one dangerous thing that might happen to them and their families. And I went back, and I'm going to quote a dead economist, but I went back and reread Frederick Bastiat, and he has this great passage where he's asking the question, why is Paris fed? And he marvels at the fact that nobody in Paris has given it a single thought as to why food shows up at the markets every day. And he's writing, of course, in the 1800s. And he talks about the division of labor. And I would imagine that the phrase division of labor is about as meaningless of anything that you could use in an argument. In our country, we talk about supply chains. Nobody knows what that is, because nobody knows how food gets to the table. So the phrase I came up with, sort of to counter the, or maybe even attached to the overarching concern about safety and security and predictability. People want to know that things are going to be okay, so they cling to the past in a lot of ways to do that. And so I started calling, I don't like to use the word market, I started calling it our mutual support structure, where everybody sort of steps up and adds value in ways that we really can't even conceive of. I mean, families function this way too. There is that certain top down, but there's also a shared responsibility that everybody takes that creates really beautiful things that we couldn't do alone. And I think figuring out how to explain the market process is a really important thing. And the other aspect of that is that in a world where tomorrow is radically uncertain, all we know is what happened yesterday. And this is an Austrian economics point, but it applies to where we are today. We have so much uncertainty about so many things, and without free people coming together to solve problems, each with their own personal knowledge, and they know what they need, they know what they want, they know what they're able to do. If we don't let that process work through, we don't have a way to manage risk and uncertainty and the insecurity that comes with it. But ultimately, and Terry's going to interrupt me at this point, said that's all great too, but you should really tell a personal story about someone that actually did it.
Right. I mean, there's so many problems. And I mean, I've used the phrase supply chain more in the last 3 months than I think I have in my 55 years of existence. There's so many examples of where things have gone wrong here in the United States. We can look at the meat industry for one. Our meat processing is unfortunately localized and concentrated in maybe 6 or 8 meat processing plants in the country, which is insane. And they've had problems and they've had to shut down. And there's now meat shortages here in the United States, but there are local producers who are producing beautiful pork and beef, but because of government regulations, they can't actually sell those to people.
We can't talk about beef.
I know. We can pork. I'll concentrate on pork and chicken. I know.
Talk about it. We can't have it.
But the point is, so government regulations are causing these farmers, they have these beautiful chickens and they can.
Nice pivot to chickens.
Thank you. They can slaughter them and they can give them to their neighbors, but they can't sell them in a farmer's market down the street because of government regulations. And so there are now bills in Congress that will enable farmers to be able to sell the things that they are producing to people. It's kind of amazing that they can't. You look like you're going to interrupt me again.
No.
Would you call, like, what this past 3 months across the globe has made me learn is the idea that you just mentioned, right? About decentralization, about people coming together, about free market ideas. And I'm focusing on the free market ideas. For me, the idea is decentralize everyone working in smaller pockets to solve a bigger problem, right? Now,
Right.
For example, the one problem that everyone in the globe trying to solve is the COVID disease, right? And how to come up with a vaccine. So everyone, pretty much every country is trying to come up with a vaccine. In a way, there's like a race now. Which country will come up with the solution first? Right? So that's one. Second is this barrage of this new way of studying, which is like online. Not just studying, actually, the online market. So, for example, meat market in India, I know a bunch of my friends have started online businesses now. Restaurants have gone online completely. There is, as I said, there's online studies, there's food and groceries online. So all these things have come online. So now, would you call this pandemic, this new situation that we are now living in, as giving a new opportunity? In a way, also trying to justify what pro-liberals have always been talking about, that decentralized, let everyone race towards it, and then people will eventually come up with a better, or rather best solution for the country or society.
Yeah, no, it definitely is an opportunity for us. I mean, look at the various regulations that have been waived because we don't need them in times of crisis. Well, if we don't need them in a time of crisis, then we don't need them generally. I mean, I can now take 12 ounces of hand sanitizer on an airplane, but I can't take 12 ounces of shampoo. So that makes no sense. So possibly they will start really, relaxing some of these regulations involving what you can take on airplanes. And there's a lot of other things that are being relaxed. As the FDA is certainly allowing tests and treatments to come to market much sooner. They're not taking the normal 18 to 20 years that it sometimes takes to get a drug approved here. So I do think that there's opportunities. Companies have been definitely innovating. We have friends that run a distillery in Virginia, and they stopped making whiskey and bourbon and started making hand sanitizer. At first, they were just giving it away, but then the market was there, so they're now selling it. Of course, there were government barriers for them to do this, but there's a lot of positive stories that we are trying to find and talking about individuals that are making a difference. There was a kid in Minneapolis who had been participating initially in the protests for George Floyd, and he went to bed and he woke up the next morning, and it was the day after all of the riots had really broken out, and he was horrified by what he saw. And he had just rented a small U-Haul because he was moving. He was 18 years old. His story is actually pretty amazing. He got up and he got a bunch of garbage bags and he went out to the street where all of the protests had happened, and he started cleaning up. And his story got told across the country. And he had a tough childhood growing up. His mother died early. His father wasn't involved in his family. He was trying to save enough money so that he and his sister could live together. He wanted to go to school. He didn't have a car. Somebody gave him a car. He now has a 4-year scholarship to a university, so he took matters into his own hands at a local level. I read a great story about an auto rickshaw driver in Pune. He had saved, I think, 2 lakh rupees for his wedding, which was canceled, of course, because of the lockdown. And so he used that money to provide meals to all of the migrant workers that were trapped and couldn't get home. And his story became known. And people pitched in, and he was then given, I think the number was 7 lakh rupee. And he took that money that he was given and then provided more people with food. There's all sorts of positive things. And we talk about it as the unstoppable human spirit. And we're going to end our talk here now by showing this video, and then we'll open it up to questions. This was produced by Sam Martin, who is our creative director, I think is his title. Sam does beautiful work, and I'm going to do another pitch. If you haven't already signed up, go to our Free the People channel on YouTube, and you can watch all of these videos that we make. This one from Sam is one that I am just really, really proud of, and I hope you guys like it too, and I hope it will end our talk in a positive way, and so that we can take more positive questions moving forward.
I think the end of...
Sorry, that's the wrong one. Sorry. I knew I was going to mess it up eventually. Give me 1 second here. Oh, I clicked on that one. Here we go. Nope, it's still, hold on. All right, give me 1 second. I promise you I will make this work.
So
you're on screen, so you can keep talking while I try to solve
this.
So
the other comment I wanted to make to your last question is, when it gets to centralization versus decentralization, are we ready to roll?
Yeah, I can do this now. I believe I have it solved. Let me go back to screen share. Fingers crossed. There it is.
From the point of view of the media, you'd think the world is coming to an end. When we spend our time locked up in houses, terrified of a virus lurking outside our door. We turn on the news, follow all the rules of our elected officials. They know what to do, right? Give up our rights without a fight. Didn't need those anyways, right? Would rather feel safe than have the space to live my life, go outside, take the kids to the park, go back to work. But I want to tell a different story. When all we hear about is shortage, mask shortage, test shortage, bed shortage, food shortage, cure shortage, we forget about the abundance, the dedication, the intrepid nature of the human spirit to come together under one goal, one flag, one cause. When the regulations and laws are stripped away to allow businesses to innovate, retool, and activate their millions of workers and leaders and humans that want to do good with their skills and creativity, brilliantly shifting their entire business to fit the needs of this crisis. So the media says we have a testing and treatment shortage. There are over 79 companies around the world working together for better solutions and availabilities, shifting industries to meet the world's needs. Alphabet building a website to find nearby testing sites. Credo Diagnostics creating a 20-minute COVID-19 test. Cytodyn and Gilead creating antiviral medications. Collaborations between biotech firms and educational institutions to create RNA interference therapies, and Cellularity creating a potential stem cell therapy. There are more than 50 companies around the world creating vaccines at breakneck speed. Trials already starting in 2020, never before seen in the history of humanity. Clothing companies rearranging their supply chains to create masks and protective equipment for healthcare workers on the front lines. Breweries creating hand sanitizers. IKEA working with suppliers to create masks, aprons, and visors. Printing companies making face shields. Giants in the auto industry field producing hundreds of thousands of ventilators, free of regulators telling them what they can and can't produce. 100,000 people are offering their Airbnbs for free for COVID-19 responders. Uber drivers donating 10 million free rides and deliveries for healthcare workers, senior citizens, and others in need. So is the world really ending? Is everything actually as depressing as they're saying? Are we really as divided as they're making us out to be? Or maybe we're more united than ever. Maybe we can weather any storm together, because when people are free to create and innovate, it activates an unstoppable resilience in the human spirit.
So that essentially was a defense of decentralized entrepreneurship to solve problems through markets without saying any of those words, I don't think.
So, all right. With that, I think we are 5 minutes off our scheduled time. Thank you, both of you. It was really fascinating, and I always, as I said, enjoy watching videos. And the last bit was really important, which talked about a human spirit versus animal spirit. So the human spirits are coming back, and together we are creating this beautiful world, which was never thought about or imagined. So yeah, what you mentioned is always an opportunity in crisis. With that, is there anything else that we must do, Venkatesh? Over to you.
Let me check the question and answers.
All right, let's say what's the question answer.
Okay, we haven't got any. So
We couldn't have answered everything.
so let me I will ask my own question. It might be a slightly different from the exact topic of this one. So most of the times that community, this moral language has been largely grabbed by the left wing. So they actually always try to use the words that morality or social justice, we needed to care for the society. Even though their ideas is not actually working, how they would able to actually improve the way they communicate than ourselves, because we always actually lag very behind when compared to how we actually promote liberty as a central institution for community growth or overall betterment of the society.
So I think it's a great question, and I'm gonna go back and beat the same dead horse that I was beating before. That phrases like social justice, and we all know that Hayek told us that the phrase social justice was an abomination of the word justice, and it destroyed the meaning of the term. But my argument is that the sort of the hard left, the authoritarian left, has stolen so many of our words that we even have to qualify the word liberal with classic liberal. And we all know what happened to classic Coke, right? So we're constantly giving up these words, and the entire conversation today is about community. When did we give up the word community? I don't think we give up the word justice, and I'm willing to say the phrase social justice as long as I then go on to define my terms. Social justice to me means treating everybody just like everybody else under the laws of the land. That also happens to be the definition of justice in any meaningful sense. Democracy to me is pushing as much power as we can back to the end user. It doesn't mean it's not this bastardization where 50+1% of the people get to oppress and do whatever they want to the other 49%. That's not democracy. Democracy is everybody choosing all the time. The same with community. Community is people solving problems through voluntary cooperation. So all of these words that have all this moral resonance with people across the political spectrum, but maybe more so on the left, those are our words. Those are the words that we need to describe the process of free people solving problems. And as long as we're constantly defining our terms as we talk about them, I don't think we should cede that moral ground.
There's one more question, I believe. I'll just read out. Question is the idea of restorative judgment feasible in countries having large population as India?
Can you repeat that again? Sorry.
Yeah, it broke up.
So the question is the idea of restorative judgment feasible in countries having large population as India?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'll start. I'm part of a national group of more progressive folks and conservatives called the Civic Collaboratory, and I was meeting with a guy that runs the Center for Restorative Practices. I think I got the name of his organization. He's based in Detroit, and our documentary is about a fairly small community in Longmont, Colorado. It's probably 75% white, 25% Hispanic. So maybe a lot more monolithic looking than Detroit, which is a large city. But he believes that restorative practices, and particularly the process of restorative justice, can work anywhere. It can work in big cities, it can work in small towns. And the nice thing about it is that it doesn't have to be one size fits all. You could actually take the documentary and some of the principles that are applied in very practical ways and take it to your town in India and talk it through with your community. You have to get you have to get law enforcement to buy in. You have to get communities to buy in. You have to get the victims to buy in. This is the restorative process itself. But I think the principles are universal.
Right, and I mean that's kind of the point of it. It's community based. So a restorative justice program in Detroit will look very different than something in Longmont, Colorado, or restorative justice in Mumbai would look very different than something in Hyderabad. And that's the beauty of it. I mean, when you have this top-down justice system, it doesn't work because the communities are so different and people are different all over the country and all over the world. And so that's the beauty of this, is that it can be modified to work wherever it needs to work in whatever size community that it will be implemented in.
And by the way, the other half of that, the other thing that we have to push for, if we're pushing for restorative justice, we have to stop criminalizing every tiny little non-violent, none of your business thing. We just have an infinite number of rules. I think you guys have the same problem in India. And if you have so many rules that police can sort of arbitrarily target people, that's where a lot of the racial disparity in our country comes from, because they just go for low-hanging fruit instead of worrying about actual crime where people are getting hurt, people are getting murdered. That's why we fund law enforcement, but so much of it in our country is focused on small things that a lot of us wouldn't even consider crimes at all.
The victimless crimes.
Yeah.
A friend of mine in Los Angeles got a $500 ticket for jaywalking when there wasn't a car in sight. Fairly certain that LA has bigger problems to deal with than that.
We do have, India has a lot of similar kind of problems, a lot more. We went through something called License Raj, which was the era of British, where the Raj word comes from the British time, and license, of course, it still is. This new government promised, of course, that they will be reducing a lot of licenses. They did achieve some bit of that, but of course, not everything was achieved. So as per one of the websites which monitors the government, the current government, the promises were 657, and out of those 657, roughly around 400 plus aren't fulfilled, and the other things are in the pipeline. So which basically also means they will not be.
Right.
There's one more question which says, how to influence the government to reduce personal income taxes in India, while lower taxes help community. So question is basically how to, especially in the current current space, current environment, where we need more money to spend or more money in our hand, how to reduce the income taxes and how to sort of convince the government to say individuals or community must have more money with them instead of in the banks or taxes or other rates.
You're the economist. You get to answer this one.
All right, can I quote a dead economist when I do this?
Just this once.
So it's, I mean, this is a challenging one for all of us, and we're all about to have a complete crisis in government finance. And I know this is true everywhere because lockdowns shut off the spigot of tax revenue coming from particularly small businesses that were not allowed to generate revenue. So you do the math, there's going to be a lot less tax revenue coming into governments as they spend all of this money ostensibly to mitigate the economic damage of Corona. In our country, the government spent $3 trillion. That's $1 trillion.
That was just in one bill.
And this gets to my argument. A tiny fraction of that actually went back to taxpayers. So if you want to rebuild your economy, you need the government to get out of the way. You need to create an environment where those small businesses and those people in those communities can rebuild from the bottom up. And the best way to do that is to lift the tax burden, particularly the income tax burden. But I would argue across the board, this is a time when governments have to step back and maybe even acknowledge some of the damage they did. I doubt they'll want to do that. But my biggest fear about economic recovery is not the resiliency of free people. It's the inability of government to A, admit that they screwed up, and B, have sort of the dignity to step back, lower tax burdens, keep those regulatory burdens low, regulations that they suspended during times of crisis, and the economy will flourish again if they do that. And tax relief has to be part of that. But I'm not super optimistic that we can win that argument, but that it has to be the injustice of how they redistribute income and how people and not insiders get screwed.
Okay. Maybe this very interesting question, and which is, does democracy compatible with socialism, as there is rising demand for democratic socialism in USA? I think the first question is much important to sort of answer. And I think one of the videos that you also have does touch upon similar kind of argument, which is democracy compatible with socialism, especially from the monarch side when the kings and queens went away and then this new system was created.
Yeah.
I think you know more about our videos than some of our staff. We might have to hire you.
I'm a big fan. I eat videos.
So I do think, and I just define democracy the way I think about it, which is pushing power back to the individual. And almost any definition of democracy means that the people are in charge. And if you actually go back and read Karl Marx and read the entire theory of socialism as it was intended by the people that created it, socialism is by definition a top-down, one-size-fits-all. Somebody's in charge. There's even a phrase in Marxism called dictatorship of the proletariat. And that also, by the way, is a contradiction in terms, but I think the only word that matters in there is dictator. They're going to centralize everything. And that phase of socialism is by definition very violent, because it's hard to get people to do exactly what you want them to do, and there's going to be a lot of collateral damage in that process. So I think we've reframed the socialist debate in our country. We mentioned Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her mentor Bernie Sanders really have refashioned this phrase democratic socialism. So that's my critique, but the other half of that is that people that are attracted to this concept, I don't think they've ever read Marx. I don't think they in any way believe that they're advocating for a new dictatorship of the proletariat. They're thinking about a lot of the things that we've been talking about this entire 45 minutes. They're thinking about bottom-up, community-based problem solving, people taking care of each other, people voluntarily associating with each other. And you could actually listen to some of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's most compelling speeches when she was elected to Congress. And she's really talking about a decentralized system. So it's important that we not just make fun of or dismiss people that claim to be democratic socialists, but say, let's talk about things we might agree on. Do we believe in community-based problem solving? Do we believe in voluntary association? Do we believe in sort of a tolerant world where all of us in our individuality and differences can somehow live side by side without being picked on by government rules that punish some people and reward others? I don't think any of those things are socialist, but if your nomenclature says that you want to call that democratic socialism, I don't care. Let's just agree on the principles and the values, and then we can argue about the language.
I'll answer the next question.
One more question. I think a question is pretty straightforward. Do you think major companies taking charge in production of essential products such as masks, soaps, etc., taking small businesses out of market? So the good old fight between the bigger fish versus smaller fish, the Amazons and the Alibabas versus the smaller mom and pop stores and the production of those things. And especially a few days back, the government of India announced something where we said there should be Make in India concept, which is similar to what Make in America concept. It was coined by Modi government in the first season about making India. Second season, he said Make in India. Big flop, big time flop. And I think you'll be able to break it down better, why it was a big flop, Make in India. And then it got repackaged to self-resilient India, where people should be making things for themselves. And then the idea behind that was to smaller groups working for themselves instead of having exported products. So what would be your sort of argument on that, big fish versus small fish? Is there something like that, big fish versus small fish?
Well, I mean, I think the market needs both. I think that the big markets, the Walmart stores and well, Amazon's a whole separate thing, because Amazon is a distributor. They don't really produce any of the goods that they sell, although I mean, they buy them from others. So, I mean, there are people that shop at Walmart and goods are cheaper there, the made in China and all of that. There's room in the market, in the overall market for that. And then there's also room in the market for the smaller companies and the smaller producers. I mean, those may be slightly more expensive, but people can choose where they want to spend their money and how they want to spend it. The masks are a great example. So there's mask shortages all over the world, right? You couldn't get them. Amazon was completely sold out. And then people started making their own cloth masks that they were selling. And so we have bought masks. I bought a few on Amazon that took forever to get here. But from local people that were making them one at a time. Smaller companies changed their clothing lines to make masks instead of yoga pants. So I think that there's room for everything. I think that made in America and made in India, those drive up prices overall. And I think that will harm people in the long run. I think, like with Amazon, they sell things from large producers, but a lot of what they're selling is from small producers too. There's small businesses that have moved their product lines online, and they can reach people across the world through Amazon.
So the thing that I think we need to guard against, and this is a real problem with big corporations, and it's not that balance that Tony's talking about. It's when big corporations go to government and get special favors, and
crony capitalism.
Crony capitalism, and I'm very much comfortable using that phrase. I know some capitalists are offended by that phrase, but getting back to the previous question, a lot of young people who think that they're democratic socialists believe that they hate capitalism because they hate cronyism, and they hate the fact that the game is rigged by insiders, and big corporations absolutely use regulations to crowd out mom and pop businesses, and we need to fight against that, particularly in this environment, because there's no doubt that Amazon very much flourished at the same time that all of these small businesses were prohibited from actually producing goods. And that, to me, is classic cronyism. That's not capitalism.
So there's one question there, but before that, based on what you just mentioned, I have this question. A couple of years back, I think it's been 2-3 years already, Fee came up with one video which talked about two individuals. There's Mr. Gov, which was a short form for government, and there was Mr. More for Me, which was more for me. And that's what, because it's associated with what you mentioned about individuals thinking about democratic socialism, crony capitalism. But isn't people inherently, when they're born, they want more for themselves? So if you want more for themselves, the technology you have, the way we are able to connect right now, and what you also mentioned that you did 3 conferences in the last 3 days or last 1 week, and still you're not feeling jet lagged at all. It's all because of technology. It's all because of somebody is thinking to, of course, gain more for themselves, but by that, a lot more people are getting the benefits. Can you truly be against the idea of capitalism? Is that even a thing? Can you be against capitalism?
I think in practice, no, because people that very much complain about these big technology companies, I love seeing these communist marches in the United States, and everybody's waving their iPhone in anger at all of the capitalist oppression, and that's a contradiction. So in practice, we're all capitalists because we all want better stuff. We all want a lower price. We all want to do the best we can for ourselves and our families. And that's a beautiful thing.
I mean, people rail against Bill Gates because he has so much money, or Jeff Bezos because they have so much money, right? No one should be allowed to be that rich. They shouldn't be allowed to have that many millions. But what people don't talk about when they're railing against them is how many other millionaires that Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates and all of those amazing people have created, and how they've made the lives better for so many others. That part is always lost in the equation. I mean, the guy that signed on as employee number 3 or 4 at Microsoft, his life was drastically changed because of Bill Gates and because of his vision and entrepreneurship. And people forget about that. And that's very, very critical.
I think what in one of the documentaries, really old documentary that I remember seeing, I think as a kid, by John Stossel, Greed. And he ends his documentary with one beautiful line, and he says, insofar if the money that's earned is legally and lawfully earned money, it is good. But if you're doing, of course, some illegal activity, it is not capitalism. It either goes to crony capitalism or an illegal, unlawful activity. But the last question I think we should take is, and this goes to a lot of other theories, a lot of dead economists must have talked about this, including on subsidies. The question that is here, it says, which sectors should be helped by government during the crisis of COVID? Or I would rather be a lot more like a devil's advocate and say, should there be any one sector that government should help through subsidies or through any, I mean, it's going to be subsidies or handout only anyway. Should there be such phenomena, such thing?
So let me say hi to Mugabe John. We met in South Africa 3 years ago.
Yeah.
You know, I'm a bit of a purist, and I think that almost everything that government does actually hurts more than it helps. And if we're going to start choosing winners and losers as we rebuild the economy, I think that's a disastrous thing. So I would be an absolutist saying, don't subsidize industry, don't choose this, that, or the other. I should say that Justin Amash, who is now the only libertarian member of Congress in the United States, his argument for that $3 trillion, he voted against it, but his argument for doing it right was to make sure that any government reallocation of resources is distributed equally directly to families, and it doesn't go through middlemen. It shouldn't go to fund new government agencies, which is a lot of what's happening now.
It shouldn't go to the Kennedy Center.
Right. And so all of our money went to big corporations, and there's a huge slush fund at the Treasury Department and all of that. And that's going to make everything worse. And it is grossly unfair. And I think it's a reason that a lot of people become socialists. But if you want, we spent another hour listing a litany of government failures in every one of our countries. And my plea to any government is, please stop helping. You're making things worse. Get out of the way, lower taxes, lower regulations, and let us, free people, work together, clean up the mess that you made.
Didn't you make a video on that?
I might have quoted my own video.
Yes. I confirm that. I think the last question, because there's no question, I think it was for 60 minutes, is this new, not a new thing, very old thing, but a lot more people are talking about it, which is Black Lives Matter versus Muslim Lives Matter, like entire Islamophobia, right? In India, it's a big thing. It's happening across the globe. In India, I've been also in this because I am Muslim, so I'm also facing a lot of these things and also been a part of it. What is more not important, but where the focus should be, caste or race, or both are important if you have to solve something?
So I'm not smart enough to solve your problem. I'm going to depend on you guys to solve that. But I'm going to quote Senator Mike Lee, who has been on my show, and he has a very, I think, fundamental insight on all of this. In our country, we have 50 states, and our country was originally designed to be a federalist system, meaning that the states were really in charge, and the federal government should generally stay out of almost everything except a few things that defend the rights of individuals against corruptions at the state and local level. His argument is that as we've shifted all of the power back to Washington, D.C., we've created more hate and animosity because we've taken away the power of local communities to sort of embrace the things that matter to them. And that might be religion, that might be cultural customs, it could be an infinite number of things. It might be the color of your skin, I don't know. But if it's all has to be centralized, and democracy in India means the majority doing whatever they want to the minority, that's not liberal, that's not classically liberal. And it's by definition a recipe for cultural hate and violence. So again, we have a solution. Us people that believe in localism, I think there's incredible tolerance and understanding and an ability to get along with people that are very different from us, as long as it's not coerced by the state. We can all figure this stuff out. And I think that applies to what's going on in India. It applies to Black Lives Matter. And it applies to all sorts of problems that governments have been disastrous. They've made things worse.
You seem to feel pretty strongly about
Are you
that.
buying that?
Yeah.
So people are free if they're not coerced. Yes, that would be the last word, maybe. All right, Venki, it's 7:03.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sadaf, for wonderfully moderating this session, and thank you so much, Matt and Terry, for actually agreeing to speak with us. And we really had a very great session, very unique one. So far, we had the sessions because it's not talk about the numbers or logics, economic approaches. It's more about the importance of the stories, communities, culture, how we can actually build a life together. And I would like to repeat your quote and also name of your book. Don't, I'm sorry.
Don't hurt people.
Don't
And
hurt people, don't take their stuff. And as long as people are free, it actually enables us to actually advance many areas that actually matters to us, education, health, many more scientific advancements. We have actually proven that we needed to embrace these ideas that actually cause human flourishment. One of our core principles at Swatantrata is advancing ideas and policies that can actually cause human flourishing. And one personal note, Matt is someone actually I feel very close to me. I consider one of my gurus whom I actually look up to him when I was actually missing the path, and I always take the inspiration from him. Thank you so much, Matt, being with us, and also Terry has been a long-time supporter of me and my work. And many people might not know Sadaf has been one of the earliest supporter of my work through the CCS. He sends the books, he sends the speakers, he actually provided the time to guide when I was actually student leader with Students for Liberty and India's Future Foundation. And thank you so much, all of you, and thank you so much for the participants who actually joined from India, Nepal, Africa, for actually listening to this wonderful talk. And for last note, we will be starting another session at 7:30 with on ideas of classical liberalism, what we are actually talking about, how it is a relevance today with Dr. Nigel Ashford from Institute for Human Studies. And I'm looking forward for all of you to join there. Thank you so much, Matt and Terry and Sadaf.
Thank you so much for having us. Hope to
Yes.
see you in person soon.
Soon enough.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Have a good night. Have a good day for both of you.
All right. Thank
Thanks,
you.
guys.
Thanks. Bye-bye.